My great pleasure to introduce D9, who will be talking about something that should require no explanation here, but in fact does. What makes hackers so extraordinary? And I would normally just say, look around, but actually there's some very interesting insights that we're about to hear. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, can everybody hear me okay? In the back? All right. I'm going to be a little podium bound, so I apologize. And as he said, most of the people at this conference, this does not surprise them. I think what I'm going to offer you today, though, is something that maybe you've known intuitively, but this is my dissertation, so it's peer-reviewed research, and so I think it kind of brings home a lot of things that maybe most of the people in the room here and at this con knew, but really didn't maybe fully understand. So I'm going to, and I think there's a link back to the theme in this particular conference, which is one of the keys to voting security is getting the right people in your security shop. And I, as a trainer, and we'll talk about my experience, but as the head of DoD policy for training for several years, we didn't always know exactly the right skill sets we were looking for. And as a result, we used surrogates, which in the end were suboptimized capabilities. And the reason why I did this research was really to understand who makes a good hacker. And it's not everyone. It's not everyone. All right, let's go to the next slide. So a little bit about me. 41 years in the government. There's some people in the crowd that actually know me, this guy here. But 41 years in the government. I was an Air Force pilot, deployed a couple of times, retired '06, then became a government bureaucrat. So when people used to ask me like, what do you do, D9? I would go, I'm a government bureaucrat. And they wouldn't ask me any more questions. Because if I gave them my like title, they'd go, well, what's that about? And then I'd have to explain that too. So I just said, I'm a bureaucrat, and everybody, no more questions. These are kind of things I did. Yeah, I was a SES. I was the Director of Training and Education in the Office of Secretary of Defense, so I was in USDP&R on the readiness side. And then I decided to do something different, and I went over and I sat in the Navy for about 5 years and did work in expeditionary warfare, which was a lot of fun. For an Airedale to learn about ships was really a career change for me. I got my doctorates from UPenn, and that's what this talk is about. And right now, I'm an independent AI cyber researcher. And I am not a techie. I'm a guy that understands the sociology piece, and not really the tech. I mean, I know enough about tech to be dangerous, have an engineering degree, but I'm not really a techie. So what did I research? What are the core hacking soft skills? What are they? Here's some examples of people that have definitely proven credentials. I looked for people of that caliber, and I interviewed people of that caliber. In fact, I had 34 candidates. I ended up interviewing 17 of them. If I were to tell you some of the names of the people, you would recognize most of them. Many of them are at this con today. And these were people that were hackers in the black hat community, did hacking, and then decided they were going to transition over to the InfoSec community. So that was one of the key things that I was looking for, is did they make that transition and how they do it? Okay. So some definitions. This came right from the mouth of one of my interviewees. He called himself a chameleon. That make sense? Particularly when I did this research, they were countercultures. Think about it. The black hat community and the InfoSec community, that's a counterculture, which means that if you're going to fit in, you need to understand how to fit in and how to be a chameleon, which I'll talk a little bit about. Habitus. Very difficult concept. Pierre Bourdieu is the kind of the guy that conceptualized it. It's about not just like what you have, but it's what you learned. And it's embodied, which means it's not only the way you think, but it's the way you walk. It's the way you carry yourself. It's the way you present yourself. I mean, when you walk around this conference, people watch a little bit and watch the different ways that people carry themselves. The way they do that is part of their habitus. And so what I was really looking at was this habitus concept. So it wasn't just about like what was up here, but it's the whole package. And this Bourdieu character, a very accomplished French sociologist, came up with this concept. Reflexive, self-conscious inquiry and awareness. So, do you take the time every day to think about why you did certain things or what happened as a result of your actions? This reflexivity part is really key to them being able to do the metamorphosis that I'm going to talk about. Code switching. Anybody a linguist? Code switching is a linguistic term when you mix languages. So why? You mix languages, so let's say I'm an Italian American. I use Italian words when I'm talking to my Italian friends. Why? Because it helps me fit in better, right? And it emphasizes what I'm trying to say by using key words from that language, as opposed to all English. Metacognition. Anybody know what that is? Very difficult term. One of the research areas that I'm looking at is developing a metacognitive AI. Metacognition is about decoupling yourself from the conversation you're having with yourself. So when you do metacognitive thinking, let's say you read something. You go, well, that means this. A metacognitive approach to that reading would say, why do I believe that what I just read means X? You very rarely, when you're reading, you very rarely ask yourself that question, right? You just come to a conclusion, you move on. Metacognitive thinking is about understanding the rationale and the evidence behind why you think about things, which is why a metacognitive AI is really interesting. It needs to be able to justify to itself and to its human operators why it made the decision it made, which we don't normally ask computers to do. The hackers I'm about to talk about are very accomplished metacognition people. Who did I study? Snowball referrals, we talked about 37. Computer interest, many of them at a very young age. 4 years of age was as young as one of them started. One of them did their first hack at age 6. You know what he hacked? He hacked the voice announcement of a movie theater. Right? So he's kindergarten. He likes this girl. So he calls up the movie theater and it has a voicemail that says, today we're going to show X, Y, and Z. Instead what he did was he's like, I want to change that voicemail so I can talk about how much I like this young girl. So he tries a couple of numbers and he's like, what's the code to re-enter the message? Well, it turned out the guy used the phone number for the movie theater. So he puts in the phone number, voila, he has access to the tape recording and he puts his own recording on the movie theater. He did that at age 6. He went on to become part of NSA and he was the TAO people. For anybody that knows what TAO is, that's the kind of guy he is. But he started hacking at age 6. I'm looking for people that have DEF CON level black badge kind of skills. Those are the people I interviewed. Every one of them, all 17, all had that kind of capability. And this was something else that came out in the research. Extreme interest in puzzles. How many people in this room like puzzles, like solving things? How many people like taking things apart to see why they work? Interesting. You'll see that in a second. So let's talk about what did the research show. So I interviewed these 17 people. One of the interviews took over 6 hours. And I asked them a series of questions, and then what I did is it's called thematic coding. So I had like 400 pages of transcripts, single spaced. And what I looked for was common words. Common words. What was in there? What was common across what they were talking about in response to my questions? So there's the first one. Every one of them had an obsession for self-directed learning. And it didn't matter the topic. Beer, cars, coffee, didn't matter. Whatever it was, they had to be the expert in it. They had to study it to the nth degree. We talked about that. A passionate curiosity for how things work. A fixer. They didn't always fix their stuff, particularly when they were young. They take stuff apart and then when they wouldn't really know how to put it back together again, but they took it apart to figure out how it worked. Tenacity to work forever. How many people in this room will not stop solving a problem once you start solving it? Many of my interviewees said they would die first before they would quit. That's a quote. They would fall asleep at their computer, wake up, and go right back to work. If they had a significant other, they would eat, but they would have no idea when that person brought the food in or when they took it away. It's called a state of flow. Many of them get into a state of flow. Time pretty much stops for them. Hours go by and it seems like minutes. State of flow. And they do it at an extreme level. Breaking something that earns symbolic capital. We'll talk about what symbolic capital is. But this is really about, look at these things. Does that sound familiar? Defeating people or the institution. Validating their self-worth. Breaking it because it's there. These top two are particularly, I'm not a psychologist, but you can kind of understand where some of that comes from. But not everyone was a breaker. There's also a class of builders. They're about earning symbolic capital, which I'll talk about. The love of the build. Improving the world. Building as a means of livelihood. And the interesting thing is that this tale of two generations is really about the early hackers didn't have anything to break, did they? There was nothing to break. So the tale of two generations really is the older hackers that I talked to were more on the builder side. They were more on the creator side because there wasn't anything to break. Later, these folks came into play. A high degree of process orientation. Structure is required. I think structure is required just to do the work you do. But they needed structure in their life too. And there's actually a bias that's associated with that. And then the last one is constantly questioning the status quo. This is about being a rebel. This is about not saying the rules, yeah, there's rules, but I'm a rebel. Okay? And what's really odd about those last two, and this goes back to when you're looking for people in this community to come secure the stuff that's over there, one of the key markers is finding someone who is process-oriented and structured, but also a little bit rebellious. And you don't normally find those two things in a human being, right? If you're a process-oriented person, you're normally not a rule breaker, are you? Because you're following the process. So those two things right there are key markers when you're looking for talent in this area. If someone has those kinds of things, The next question you should ask them is, like, what do you do in your time off? Let me ask the crowd, what do you do in your time off? Do you get on your computer and you do it 24/7? So if you have those characteristics and you ask them what they do in their time off and they go, I go to the bar. Well, maybe that's not the right person. There's nothing wrong with going to the bar. But most of the people we're looking for have this like, I gotta do this. It's part of my life. So when you're looking for people in this area, I mean, think about that. Breaking it because it's there. And you'll see a quote from one of my study participants about Mount Everest. Anybody know George Mallory? What do you know about George Mallory? George Mallory, World War I veteran, had an identity before he went into combat and totally lost his identity when he came back. Almost everyone he knew was killed in combat. So when he came back, he questioned who he was. And he did this because he's trying to find what another person told me, which is that. Just take a look at that quote. The guy that said that, does anybody know who this is? Does anyone know that person? Alan Curtis Kay, Turing Award winner, developed object-oriented programming, built the first personal computer in the early 70s at Xerox PARC. Our good friend Steve Jobs at Apple sold most of his technology, and in fact, Alan went to work for him later on to create the business known as Apple tablets. He also created something called the Dynabook. So in the 60s, he envisioned a notebook-sized computer that would teach children. This is what he said about hackers. This is what drove Mallory, that statement right there. Because he was looking for his identity. Think about it. So, motivation. It's not about money. It's about these two things, and these are Bourdieu concepts: social capital and symbolic capital. Symbolic capital cannot be self-awarded. It has to come from someone else, and it's normally dealing with societal norms and high-level accomplishments. This is the motivation for most people that hack. Think about, remember I said they needed to prove themselves, they needed to counter the institution. Why? Because they need to show society that they have extraordinary skills and no one's cared to acknowledge it. Not that they don't need it, but it's important to go, hey, yo, I'm not a slouch. That's what that's about. I'm going to go through the rest of these slides pretty quickly. This code switching tradecraft, I'm going to talk about it really quick. We can talk about it at the end if you want to. My contribution to the literature was really about organizational socialization and how people socialize, and that it's not a one. If you look at the literature, they talk about someone enters the organization and they get acclimatized. In reality, every time you enter a new organization, you take a little bit of what you learned in the last time, and it's a chain. It's not a single one-time event. It's a lifetime chain of events. All right. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but one of the things that they talked about, this code switching practice, when I said, hey, when you go into an organization, how do you win trust? How do you assimilate? They used 5 phases of a hack. But they hacked the organization, not a technical thing. So they go, who's the key leader influencers in the organization? What can I find out about them in open source? They engage in immersed passive recon, watching, listening, observing. This is one of my things. One of my participants said, "Don't be creepy about it, though." Yeah, you're right. Don't be creepy. Scanning and establishing a foothold. Take what you've learned and reach out in a informed way. Like ask them for mentorship. Ask them, look at their LinkedIn. I mean, learn what you can about the key influencers in the organization. It's part of how they won trust. Gain access. Engage in areas where they need help, so don't be bashful. Just jump in, show them that you're capable. Look for face-to-face meetings. Be persistent, but don't brute force. Escalate your privileges. This is interesting. Move laterally in the key leaders and influence in corporate social network. The people that are talking to the key leader, go find them. Win their trust, and in the inner circle, when asked, how's Joe Schmo doing? They go, oh yeah, Joe Schmo's pretty good. Move laterally in the organization. Kind of an interesting concept. It's pretty obvious, but how many people do it? Cover your tracks. Yeah, don't get caught doing this. That's bad. And document. So what you learn from that socialization event, write it down. If you go back to that organization, you don't have to go do that research again. Okay. Is this standard business practice? Yeah, sure it is. Has anybody used a hacking construct to talk about it? No, not really. But it is a good construct to talk about, isn't it? It takes a lot of discipline to do that. And many of my participants talked about a metamorphosis process, 10 to 12 hours to get themselves into the role. It was definitely role playing, which is why I use the word tradecraft. Okay, this is me. I'm just going to give you a couple anecdotes. I ran a course for Ministry of Defense advisors. I role-played this character here who kept interrupting them when they were doing a key leader engagement with a piece of paper, right? And so much so that they yelled at me and said, stop interrupting them. And then when they got done with that session and they were in the large plenary session, I had all my stuff off and I said, does anyone recognize me? Not one person. Not one. And I go, hey, I was that pesky guy that kept interrupting you. You didn't notice me. You probably should have. Because I could be a bad guy. You didn't even acknowledge my presence because I was this guy that was just interrupting you. This guy, Pakistani, told me, I don't know why I like you. I shouldn't, but I like you. Why? I can tell you why. Because I genuinely liked him, and I showed it. I'm a Christian, he's a Muslim. He told me, I don't know why I like you. Why? Because I was using tradecraft. But I told myself before I went there, because I was deployed there for 6 months, I'm like, I'm going to like what I'm doing and I'm going to like the people I'm working with. And they sensed that. We can talk about some of this other stuff later on. That's me in my fighter world. I'm somewhere in this picture there. All right. And then there's the bureaucrat guy up there in the corner. So fighter pilot, bureaucrat dude. Just fit the part. So what does all this mean? The technique that they used, I called a metacognitive approach, sensitized by empathy. So what does that mean? So what they did is they had 3 conversations with themselves while they were in the organization. One, me and you. A second one, inside their head, going, as I'm talking to you, how are you reacting to me? I'm reading your body language. I'm reading your reaction. I'm reading your tone, right? And I'm adjusting on the fly to be more effective speaker to you. The metacognition part is, remember I talked about, I step out of that conversation, those first two, and now I'm a neutral party looking at me standing there and you standing there. And now I'm self-assessing my performance outside of the conversation I'm having with you. That's what they were doing. Think about how hard that is. And for many of them, it took a whole hell of a lot of energy to maintain that without cracking. It was difficult, but it was very effective. A counterculture, a person who would have showed up in their garb, who would not have been accepted, yet they dressed the same way, they talked the same way, they understood who the influencers were, they understood how to talk to them, and they were highly effective in quickly integrating into that organization. Why is that important? Okay, I think I'm on my last slide. The last slide. What I was talking about on those attributes, it's a gift, guys. There are very few human beings in the world that can do what you do. Part of my research showed that many of the people that were able to do the kinds of things we're talking about suffer from autism. High functioning autism, but suffer from it. And how many young kids in our schools are on an independent study program or something like that because they have a problem? When instead the teacher should be embracing it and saying, wow, what a phenomenal capability you have. The Israeli military, the British military, and the Australian military all recruit from the autism ranks for their cyber operators. The Israelis did it first. I actually had some conversation with the Brits and the Aussies, and I'll give myself a partial credit for why they stood up 2 programs after I talked to them. They both did. Now, they have conscription, at least the Israeli army does. So it's a little easier to recruit people out of high school because you can go be a grunt or you can go do this really cool cyber thing. Which would you rather do? So it's a gift. You really need to understand those attributes so that if you're a manager, if you're a hiring authority, that you know what you're looking for. And you know who the people are that are going to be successful in your organization, and this is pretty critical stuff, so you can't really mess it up, right? Don't mess it up. And then understanding this code switching tradecraft. Remember I told you it takes a lot of energy to do it. Help them out. Don't make them work so hard. Don't make them put so much stress on themselves. Help them. Help them, now that you understand that they have this need to fit in and how they're going to do it, give them the information they need to succeed. And by the way, my last closing statement is, everybody can benefit from that. So that's all I got. Thanks for your patience and time, and I'll take some questions. So, any questions? Thoughts? Any bovine banderas? Yeah, I use that. Some people got it, but BS flags, is there any BS flags? Like, D9, you're full of heck. You don't know what you're talking about. So, any questions, comments? I saw some positive things. You have a question, I can tell, man. Go for it, man.
Sorry. 2, I guess. One simple one is just if you had a social handle that we could follow, like Twitter, something like that.
Me?
And then, yeah.
So if you looked up LinkedIn, you can find Frank DiGiovanni D9. You'll see my stupid bureaucrat picture. Okay. That's me.
And then I guess the other question I had is you were talking about when someone is stepping out of the conversation and doing the metacognitive analysis. Were you saying that they're doing that actively or retrospectively?
Actively, which is totally amazing. And so, I took that, that's why I was going on AI. I'm like, wouldn't it because one of the tasks I have is to like do battle damage assessment on non-kinetic capabilities. So it'd be really cool to have a metacognitive AI that would assess the performance of the core AI. So that's the concept for this hybrid thing I'm trying to put together. Okay, anybody else? Sir.
So I'm wondering if those core attributes of hackers, they seem to possibly translate also to social engineers. And most hacks, multi-stage hacks, have a social engineering component. And everything that maybe Kevin Mitnick did when he hacked I don't know what, a social engineer might be doing the same thing as I'm trying to social engineer you, or having the same 3 conversations. I won't give up. I start with open source intelligence to find out what I need to know about you to get you to know me. So I'm wondering if you included social engineering or just the traditional technical hacking.
I think that what I'm talking about is a component of social engineering. I do. Now, where I kind of say I'm a little different is, it's like if you're a professional scout, right, and you're looking for talent, when you ask them like, well, how do you know that guy's talented? You'll see where I'm going in a second. They go, intuition. So most social engineers, maybe I'm going to be wrong, I'm just going to generalize. They have an intuitive feel for how to do it, right? What I'm saying is, let's take a Moneyball approach to recruiting people. So can I use algorithms and logic to find the right people I'm looking for, or to improve the performance of my ability to socialize? So that's what I'm saying, is that a lot of them do it kind of by their seat of the pants, and what I'm saying is, no, there's a scientific basis behind what you're doing, and if you understand the scientific basis, you'll probably be a whole hell of a lot better at it. That's kind of where I'm going. Does that make sense? And I think are you the next speaker? Okay, how are we doing on time? Am I good? Okay, I'm getting the cane. Thanks a lot. I appreciate your attention. Appreciate it.